On February 20th of this year, Roger Stone will be sentenced for his participation in the 2016 campaign to elect Donald Trump as president. While the Department of Justice is seeking to reduce the potential sentence, prosecutors are calling for up to 9 years in prison for the 67-year-old political maverick. In America, where punishments are constitutionally bound to fit the crime, depriving someone of nearly a decade of their lives is reserved for only the most heinous of crimes. By comparison, sentencing guidelines in California stipulates a 3, 6, or 8-year sentence for the crime of rape. In Maryland, the punishment for voluntary manslaughter is a maximum of 10 years. In Texas, the crime of kidnapping carries only 2 years of mandatory imprisonment. Jeffrey Epstein was busted running an underage sex trafficking and blackmail bribery scheme involving at least 40 teenage girls, and he was sentenced to only 13 months in a work release program where he got to leave the jail every morning. The former CEO of Insys Therapeutics pled guilty to conducting a bribery scheme that destroyed an untold number of lives by getting them addicted to opioids. His sentence? A little over 2 years. So what did Roger Stone do to deserve a jail sentence more harsh than rape, murder, sex trafficking, and causing the opioid crisis? Why, it's quite simple. He challenged the system. In a world where those who serve the system are permitted to lie, cheat, and steal with impunity, those who stand up against the machine will find themselves surveilled, threatened, slandered, their every right to privacy or due process trampled over by authorities as they inflict the greatest possible punishment for the slightest misbehavior. Their livelihoods taken from them, their bank accounts emptied, their doors kicked in by the FBI on national television, paraded in front of the cameras in handcuffs, shouted down by hateful mobs, legally denied the ability to even speak out in your own defense, finally to be judged by a panel of your longtime political rivals and sentenced by an activist judge. Roger Stone's case is not just a travesty of justice. It's emblematic of the utter collapse of rule of law in modern America. In this special report, I will be laying out exactly how we arrived at this point, who's involved, how they operate, and how this one anti-establishment kingpin became the center of the greatest miscarriage of justice in the history of American politics. This is the trial of Roger Stone. The trial of Roger Stone is not just about punishment far outweighing a crime. It's about the political partisan rot that infects our institutions and how a politicized judicial system has robbed Roger Stone of the fair trial that is his due. We'll begin our story just over a year ago on the morning of January 25th, 2019. As the sun rose on Fort Lauderdale, Florida, more than a dozen FBI agents moved in on Roger Stone's home. A cadre of agents dressed in military SWAT gear approached his door and began to bang, shouting, "FBI, open your door." FBI, open the door. Now, all of this was broadcast live on CNN, who had camera crews set up and rolling in preparation for the arrest.
Allison, an extraordinary morning. We were here at 5 a.m. waiting for whatever was going to happen.
Now, typically, such a heavy-handed tactic would never be used with such a high-profile individual, especially one who posed no threats. The authorities usually negotiate with the lawyers to turn themselves in, something Stone had, in fact, offered to do. But this was not a simple arrest. No, this was a made-for-TV production, a collaboration between the nation's spy agencies and the news media designed to humiliate their victim. They paraded Roger out in handcuffs for all the world to see. It was as devious as it was unnecessary, but this wouldn't be the last time the system would conspire to bring down Roger Stone. And it certainly wasn't the first. In fact, we trace the winding trail of events that have led to his arrest. We find a path replete with conniving politicians, dirty cops, and traitorous secret agents. Roger was arrested in connection to 5 felony counts of lying to investigators, 1 count of obstructing a congressional probe, and 1 count of witness tampering, all having to do with Robert Mueller's investigation, which of course we now know was simply a continuation of the FBI's so-called Crossfire Hurricane Project, the insurance policy launched by the previous administration to handicap and undermine Donald Trump's political campaign. The entire investigation itself was a baseless sham, founded on lies and carried out by corrupt agents for partisan purposes. And untangling that nefarious web of deception is a task unto itself. But suffice it to say that by January of 2017, the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, chaired by Devin Nunes with ranking member Adam Schiff, announced an inquiry into Russian activities and intentions in recent U.S. elections. Roger Stone was called to testify in front of this committee in May and September of 2017, and it's from this testimony that the indictments were drawn.
I expressed my view that I am aware of no evidence whatsoever of collusion by the Russian state or anyone in the Trump campaign.
Roger Stone was questioned about his knowledge of the DNC email dumps carried out by WikiLeaks throughout the summer and fall of 2016. In other words, the public revelation of quite damning information about the nefarious doings of the Democratic Party and Hillary Clinton, including her chairman, John Podesta. As evidenced by the indictment itself, Roger Stone had no personal contact with Julian Assange or WikiLeaks, receiving only vague and frankly often incorrect indications about their work through an intermediary. The communication consisted largely of publicly available information in the form of tweets and news articles. Julian Assange, the intermediary, and Roger, by the way, are all journalist or public speaking figures, and the only two examples of communication with someone inside the Trump campaign itself consisted of, again, publicly available information. Now, as for the charge of witness tampering, the witness himself wrote a letter to Amy Berman Jackson, the judge, saying he never once felt threatened by Roger Stone, emphatically so. But that didn't matter. The deep state had its sight set on destroying Roger Stone. Facts and reality be damned. Now, we have to remember that the only evidence linking the DNC hack and subsequent WikiLeaks to the Russian government was provided by the private security firm CrowdStrike. The FBI was actually barred by the DNC from investigating the claim themselves, so the only proof it was connected at all to the Russians was provided by this far less than neutral private company. In fact, CrowdStrike's general counsel and chief risk officer, Stephen Chabinsky, was appointed by President Obama to a presidential commission for enhancing cybersecurity in April of 2016, further demonstrating CrowdStrike's intermingling with the very Democratic Party factions that started this whole Russia collusion canard to begin with. Now, this is a common pattern in the Russia collusion myth. In fact, the entire surveillance program Crossfire Hurricane was predicated on information provided by partisan private firm Fusion GPS. And this was information the FBI knew was false, but nevertheless used as a basis for their FISA warrant. Now, as for the purpose of the HPSCI's inquiry, it was to investigate Russian cyber activity. So without this tenuous link provided by partisan actors at CrowdStrike, the entire line of investigation is without foundation. Absent that, what we're talking about here are independent journalists unaffiliated with the Trump campaign discussing publicly available information about leaked documents that Roger Stone neither helped obtain nor publish. So in a world where Hillary Clinton can violate a subpoena by destroying her devices with a hammer, James Comey can leak information to the press at will, and James Clapper can openly lie to Congress no less than 4 times about violations of our most fundamental rights, all without the slightest whiff of punishment or backlash. Why is a private citizen having his life destroyed over misremembered dates and uncooperative testimony? Because the system protects itself and ravages challengers. Had Roger Stone been in Hillary's camp, he would have no doubt received blanket immunity like Clinton aides Cheryl Mills, Heather Samuelson, Brian Pagliano, or even Paul Combetta, the computer specialist who deleted Hillary Clinton's emails despite orders from Congress to preserve them. Had Roger been in the intelligence community, he would be enjoying a lavishly paid position on CNN right now like James Clapper. The entire system wields justice, not like the blind goddess, but like the hitman of some demonic mafia. It's a wasteland populated by monsters that hunger only for the blood of the uncorrupted. And in the fetid swamp of the American judicial system, there's no creature viler than Judge Amy Berman Jackson. Judge Amy Berman Jackson is a Harvard graduate who spent a decade at a high-powered D.C. law firm representing sleazy politicians and turncoat spies. She was appointed to the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia by President Obama in 2011. Despite being billed as a nonpartisan appointment, Jackson's liberal leanings have made themselves apparent over the course of her reign. It was during the Russia collusion investigation that her value to the deep state became all too apparent. In fact, she has presided over most of the most important cases that have resulted from the Mueller investigation. In October of 2017, Jackson was assigned to preside over the criminal case that Robert Mueller brought against Paul Manafort and Rick Gates. She accepted their plea bargains and guilty pleas, but when the prosecution claimed Manafort was attempting to influence witnesses, Jackson revoked Manafort's bail and sent him to jail to await the trial, where he lingered in solitary confinement for weeks. She then claimed he violated his plea bargain, allowing her to void the agreement completely and remove his sentence reduction. She would ultimately sentence Manafort to 6 years in prison, 7.5 years when combined with the concurrent punishment from a Virginia district court. During sentencing, she went out of her way to deliver what the New York Times called a blistering critique of Mr. Manafort's character, denouncing him as a man who, quote, spent a significant portion of his career gaming the system, and criticizing his, quote, ostentatiously opulent lifestyle with, quote, more houses than a family can enjoy, more suits than a man can wear, as if one's decisions to buy suits should influence the jail sentence he receives. So, does the judge truly get to throw you in a cage for years on end based partly on whether or not she thinks you need that second house that you bought? It's absurd that such personal preferences should be included in an official sentencing decision by a federal judge, but Judge Amy Berman Jackson has a pattern of such bias. In fact, when sentencing another Mueller defendant, Alex Vanderswan, she again criticized his privileged life and seemed to alter his sentence based on the fact that this was a political and well-publicized case. So, of course, Judge Amy Berman Jackson was assigned to Roger Stone's case the very day he was arrested. He appeared before her at 11 that morning to hear the charges, where she set his bail at $250,000, and she restricted his travel to a few cities on the East Coast. He walked out of the courtroom to a massive crowd, but as he attempted to hold a press conference, a small group of hecklers was allowed to shout him down and entirely drown out his statement.
During my testimony to the House Intelligence Committee, that is incorrect. Any error I made in my testimony would be both immaterial and without intent.
So after having been pulled from his home in a pre-dawn raid in front of national television cameras and having been accused of crimes against the state that could put him away potentially for life, his one opportunity to plead his case in front of the nations was robbed from him by a couple of shrieking protesters. Luckily, he took to InfoWars to make his case.
And after a 2-year investigation, none of these charges relate to Russian collusion or WikiLeaks collaboration or any other illegal act connected to the 2016 election.
Judge Jackson worked quickly to limit Roger's ability to discuss his case freely, imposing a limited gag order, ordering him to refrain in the vicinity of the courthouse, that is, from talking to the news media or making statements that, quote, pose a substantial likelihood of material prejudice to the case. Not long after, she went even further. Of course, Twitter had already suspended Roger. Remember, the system is holistic. It's totalitarian, and it works together. So he often went to Instagram to post his thoughts. He'd pull an image from Google to accompany the text and write something out. Now, a couple of weeks after his arrest, Roger posted an Instagram image of Jackson, and next to her was a symbol, a cross in a circle, part of the background of the picture. The symbol was, in fact, the logo of a website that hosted the picture, but it was interpreted by the media as being the crosshairs of a gun and a clear and very dangerous threat of violence. Now, they're ignoring not just the source of the symbol, but the obvious fact that the gun sites have to actually be on target to be of any use at all. Nevertheless, Roger was dragged back into court, where Judge Jackson mulled revoking his bail and jailing him then and there, like she did with Paul Manafort. She threatened to modify her gag order, claiming his public pronouncements could inflame crowds outside of the courthouse. Now, this was hardly a reasonable claim, and the order likely came from the fact that the text of the Instagram post pointed out Judge Jackson's quite obvious Democratic bias. Well, that's right. Don't inflame the public by pointing out my political bias, Mr. Stone. So with the media-provided excuse of "you posted a picture of a cross near my head," Jackson prohibited Stone from posting on social media unless he was asking his followers to support him in his legal defense fund or to proclaim his innocence, and banned him from discussing anything at all related to Mueller or the Russia investigation. But that still wasn't far enough for Amy Berman Jackson. In June of that year, she went further still, outright banning Roger Stone from posting to all social media, including Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, any topic. She effectively silenced him to the entire outside world. This time, what was his transgression? His transgression had been to criticize the mainstream media. Now, he called Politico, quote, biased, elitist, snot-nosed, fake news heads whose specialty is distortion by omitting key facts to create a false narrative. He also said it was funny how there was no New York Times or Washington Post coverage of bombshell findings his lawyers had filed. In addition, he had the temerity to, get this, as NPR put it, criticize the top Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee, Representative Adam Schiff of California. And for this horror, Judge Jackson found Roger guilty of violating her gag order, saying he was using social media to gin up more public comment and controversy about the legitimacy of the Mueller investigation, which, of course, we now know was entirely illegitimate from the start. You're just not allowed to question it. She expanded the gag order, barring Roger from social media, including forwarding, reposting, retweeting, or even liking other people's posts.
Don't be a victim. If you're worried about the coronavirus, exercise, but not too hard, because that can lower your immune system. Drink extra purified, clean water so that no toxins weigh you down, but you have plenty of hydration. Prayer and meditation has been proven to make you healthier. Get plenty of vitamin C, get plenty of vitamin D3, which is fish oil. Take your colloidal silver, all of it. That's what allows you to be healthier, and get plenty of sleep. We have sold out of the 16-ounce immune gargle that has the nano silver that's patented and documented and even admitted in documents we've shown to go after this whole corona SARS family of viruses. We're almost sold out of the 1-ounce spray bottles. That'll be sold out in a couple days, and we're in about a week and a half or so of the super silver 3-ounce bottles. Great to have, period. Really good for your gums, really great for your teeth. We also have the super silver in our whitening toothpaste. Again, we're the only folks allowed to private label or make our own products with this top nanotech company based here in the U.S. that's in all these Homeland Security documents and everything, because we get the best stuff, and there's a lot of patriots. There's not just bad guys coming after us. There's the flip side of all the good guys and good gals. It's very exciting.
Now that Roger Stone has had his freedom of speech ripped away from him on spurious grounds, with the ever-present threat of solitary confinement for months on end should Judge Jackson's whim happen to turn that way, it was time to really get the ball rolling. Now, one of the first things to happen in a criminal trial is jury selection, in which both sides get to pick from a pool of possible jurors. The purpose of this exercise is to attempt to weed out those jurors who would prove less than impartial. Prospective jurors who enter the proceedings with a clear bias one way or the other are eliminated, ensuring that the jury in the case will hear arguments from both sides and judge them based on their merit alone. In a widely publicized, hyper-political case such as this one, this process is even more important than usual, as the only way a fair trial can be held is to assure that the jurors chosen don't have a political bias coloring their verdict. So when one prospective juror turned out to be Sylvia Burwell, an ex-Obama administration press secretary whose husband still works for the Justice Department division that played a role in the Russia probe, well, it was an obvious conflict of interest, and Roger Stone's lawyers requested that she be struck from the list. But this is the swamp, remember, and the swamp creatures set the rules. Judge Amy Berman Jackson denied the request. The prospective juror admitted to having negative views of Donald Trump, and she said she'd followed the media coverage of Special Counsel Robert Mueller's investigation. Now, these would be completely disqualifying in any typical criminal trial. But Judge Jackson approved of her participation on the grounds that the woman said she didn't have strong views about Stone. Okay, well, it's fine then, right? Now, if the past 3 years have taught us anything at all, it's that the anti-Trump Democrats believe they're standing up to a Hitler-like figure, Satan himself, and that any underhanded or illegal tactics used to get rid of the big bad orange man are well worth it. I mean, after all, what's one little lie, one little white lie, one little fib when you're trying to stop the creation of the new Fourth Reich? So yeah, no, I don't have strong feelings about Roger Stone at all. Now, sources close to the trial say that out of 82 prospective jurors, only 2 indicated they were Republican, and they were immediately struck down out of hand. Even one woman who'd worked for the Reagan administration was dismissed as a potential juror because of a supposed conflict of interest. However, jurors who have worked under Obama or who have expressed their hatred for Trump have been selected with no qualms whatsoever. Following the verdict, juror number 3 was revealed as being Seth Cousins, another lifelong Democrat partisan and supporter who penned an op-ed dripping with self-righteous indignation against Roger Stone. Oh, but that's fine too, right?
During the jury selection process at Roger Stone's trial, lawyers asked the eventual foreman of the jury if there was anything that would affect her ability to judge Stone fairly. No, she claimed, she hadn't paid much attention to the Russia probe. That turned out to be a lie, and a stupid one at that. That juror's Twitter account is public, and it turns out that she's an anti-Trump zealot who closely followed the Mueller investigation. In one tweet, for example, she called Donald Trump, quote, the Klan president. When Stone was taken into custody in a dawn raid by dozens of federal agents armed with automatic weapons and an airboat, she mocked the idea the arrest was excessive. Oh, seems fine to me. This is not a neutral person. This is not someone capable of judging this trial fairly. This is a partisan who lied about who she was. Roger Stone is facing life in prison because an Obama-appointed judge, Amy Berman Jackson, allowed this woman to run the jury.
She obviously had a prejudice against Roger Stone, a bias in favor of his prosecution, and an interest in seeing him convicted. That should automatically disqualify her.
Now, pro-Stone demonstrators were also not allowed anywhere near the courthouse. But of course, activists from Right Wing Watch were allowed to permanently be on site and yell slurs at Stone as he came in and out of the building. This is just the double standard that we've grown used to and accustomed to over time. By November 2019, the deck had fully been stacked against Roger Stone in every possible way. So it's time for the show trial to proceed. The trial featured testimony from the likes of Rick Gates and Steve Bannon, and it lasted only 10 days. On November 15th, the jury returned with their verdict, guilty on all 7 counts. His sentencing was set for February 20th, 2020, but his gag order has not been lifted. On the 10th of February, the prosecutors announced their request for punishment, 9 years in prison. 9 years for talking about publicly available information. 9 years for misremembering dates. 9 years for trying to defend himself against malicious prosecution. This outrageous request brought a torrent of backlash from Stone's supporters, including President Trump. The Justice Department even objected, saying that, quote, the department finds the recommendation extreme and excessive. I would hope so. Such a rebuke could not be tolerated by the prosecution, however, who abruptly resigned in protest. All 4 members of the prosecuting team resigned immediately, apparently unwilling to continue work if they were to be denied their demand of locking up Roger until he was nearly 80 years old. These people aren't unbiased. They feel like they are on a holy mission to destroy Roger Stone and Donald Trump. Now, it remains to be seen what his punishment will actually be and whether Donald Trump will actually do anything to back up his supposed fury at the mistreatment of his biggest champion. But any jail time Roger receives will just be the final blow to a man who has already been absolutely destroyed by the corrupt system he's fought for so long. A political advisor and information broker, he had his livelihood stripped away from him by relentless spying by the FBI and slander by the mainstream media. A media personality himself and radio show host, he found himself gagged and silenced. A man of modest self-earned wealth, he had his bank accounts and even his grandchildren's college funds drained to pay for his legal defense. He survives now mostly on the kindness of supporters who donate to his legal defense fund or from residuals of his book sales. He's been isolated, bankrupted, humiliated, and slandered beyond all repair, only now to face time in federal prison. And for what? Not cooperating with a crooked investigation? For resisting the deep state's attempt to destroy a president that the American people elected? This investigation was never legitimate, and this trial was never fair. Roger Stone posed a challenge to the whole corrupt Washington establishment, and that establishment went after him with every dirty trick in their book. The reality is that Roger Stone did not receive a fair trial as guaranteed by the United States Constitution. He faced a rogue special prosecutor with unlimited spying powers predicated on fabricated evidence. He faced a Justice Department infested with anti-Trump partisans out for blood. He faced a media as dishonest and conniving as they are spiteful, a judge with a clear political bias and a track record of throwing the book at Trump's allies, and a jury stocked with associates of his most bitter political foes. This is what passes for justice in modern America, and it's a disgrace. Political partisanship has wormed its way to the very bowels of our judicial system and has robbed the American people of their trust in a once sacred institution. The truth is that Roger Stone has been fighting against the system all his life. He's fought for freedom for 5 decades, always working the system, but always keeping his hands clean, using spectacle and panache where others use deceit and blackmail, always staying one step ahead of his political rivals. He is perhaps the man most responsible for the Donald Trump presidency, second only to Donald Trump himself. He's not your typical Republican. He's flashy with unmatched sartorial flair. He's fearless and relentless with a long memory and a biting wit. He's an advocate for cannabis legalization. He's a swinger who calls himself a trisexual, as in I'll try anything once. He's a libertarian who runs roughshod over the stuffy GOP blue bloods while fighting more effectively for freedom than any party-approved suit and tie. He appears on InfoWars, Breitbart, Fox News, and CNN. He's charming, principled, and above all, effective. And that, at the end of the day, was his crime. Being cool, being anti-establishment, and being a more effective political operator than the system could handle. Mitt Romney will never face the ire of the establishment. He's just as milquetoast, boring, and willing to compromise as Republicans are supposed to be. Hillary Clinton will never face justice for her crimes because she serves the system and the system serves her back. Roger Stone, however, will face a possible 9 years in prison later this month. Not, as it says in the court documents, for obstructing an investigation into Russia or threatening a witness, but for providing to all the world proof that you don't need to be a weak-willed corporate type or an illiterate redneck to be on the right wing. He proved you can be just as cool and uncompromising and outrageous as the left, and you can win. Roger Stone deserves to be pardoned by President Trump. His right to a fair trial was robbed from him, and he's been the victim of a political witch hunt meant to punish those who supported President Trump in his rise to power. I encourage everyone watching this to sign the petition, to call the White House, call your senators and congressmen, donate to the Roger Stone Legal Defense Fund, wear your Roger Stone gear out, and in fact, reach out to Roger Stone to let him know that his sacrifices will not be in vain. He's changed the world forever, and that his example will serve as the blueprint for retaking America.
They don't seem to understand all they're doing is driving more average Americans into the Trump camp and into the silent majority. It's offensive that they don't love their country. It's offensive that they don't respect our democracy, our Constitution. This country's not perfect. It's only the best place on the face of the earth.
This has been Harrison Smith for NoWorldOrder.com and Band.video. You can support everything that we do here by going to NoWorldOrder.com and purchasing some of the prepared storable food or supplements, t-shirts, hats, books, DVDs, all sorts of good stuff, and all of it goes directly back into producing this type of bombshell information and this type of true, full-hearted defense of our liberties and those who fight for them.
InfoWars, the most banned network in the world.
A kangaroo court is a court that ignores law and justice. They are held to give the appearance of a fair trial, while the verdict has been decided from the start. On Friday, January 25th, 2019, the FBI arrested Roger Stone in his home. CNN showed up moments before to capture it all in its drama. This was important because Roger Stone did nothing wrong. The allegation was that he was seeking stolen emails from WikiLeaks that could damage Trump's opponents. And even if this were true, it is no crime. So they make the arrest look like he was Al Capone, because the lie is all they have left. We know the judge assigned to the case has a political motivation to prosecute Roger Stone. With all of the corporate Mockingbird media against him, Judge Amy Berman Jackson imposed a gag order on Roger Stone, banning him from discussing his case in public, including on social media. And if that wasn't clear enough, Judge Berman Jackson made it absolutely clear during jury selection.
Her judgments have been transparently political. Yesterday, for example, during jury selection, one of the prospective jurors turned out to be a former press secretary in the Obama administration who admitted that she despises Donald Trump and has friends in the federal prosecutor's office, which is trying the case. Her husband, meanwhile, works at the Justice Department, which is prosecuting Roger Stone. The woman claims she had followed the Mueller investigation closely, but somehow had never, quote, read or heard anything about Roger Stone's case and didn't have a strong opinion about him. No sober person could take that claim seriously. But Amy Berman Jackson did. She acted like it was all completely fine and on the level. When Roger Stone's lawyers asked that that woman be removed from the jury pool, Jackson refused. Personal conflicts, she said, were, quote, not automatically disqualifying.
Even the jury felt compelled to reveal itself as anti-Trump activists. Juror Seth Cousins wrote an article for the Washington Post exposing himself as an anti-Trump activist. And now, juror Tamika Hart has revealed herself as well. After CNN exposed her identity, journalist Mike Cernovich pointed out her clear political bias on social media before she could delete it. Kangaroo Court. The Russian collusion fell apart months ago, and somehow Roger Stone's made-up crimes still stand? One would think that President Trump would have already pardoned him by now. Never leave a man behind. We cannot leave behind Roger Stone. And we cannot leave behind General Michael Thomas Flynn. And we cannot leave behind Julian Assange. These men did nothing wrong, and their continued persecution is only proof of a corrupt system. For Infowars.com, this is Greg Reese.
Back in November, former Trump advisor Roger Stone was convicted of several charges related to the now officially discredited Russia investigation. Prosecutors claimed that Stone lied about communicating with a former stand-up comedian called Randy Credico, a man whose role in the story was so minor that it's already been lost to history. For this offense, prosecutors say Stone, who is 67 years old and has no criminal record, must spend up to 9 years in prison. Now, for perspective on that sentence, the typical rapist in this country spends 4 years in prison. Armed robbers, 3 years. Thugs who commit violent assault, less than a year and a half. But Roger Stone must do 9 years until he is 76 years old for lying. Now, there's some irony here. So-called criminal justice reform is fashionable in Washington right now. An awful lot of sex offenders and drug dealers and other predators, serious predators, have been released early from prison lately. It's compassionate, they're telling us. Yet somehow, nobody in D.C. believes that compassion ought to extend to Roger Stone, who's guilty of nonviolent, essentially political offenses. Notice the opposite. The usual moralizers seem gleeful at the thought that Stone will die in a cell. CNN has been especially ghoulish on the subject. You'll remember that prosecutors tipped off Jeff Zucker's network last year so they could have cameras in place when dozens of federal agents armed with automatic weapons dragged Roger Stone from his home at dawn. Talk about state TV. For the last 2 days, the hyenas on CNN have been driven to hysteria by the thought that the Justice Department might reduce Roger Stone's sentence even by a day.
It is clearly utterly offensive to the rule of law. This is what sets this country apart. This is what a banana republic does. This is what a dictator does. It is outrageous. I hope people are infuriated by this.
The reason they're doing it is slimy, sleazy, dirty.
Roger Stone is somebody I hold in minimum high esteem. So I was not unhappy to see him get 7 to 9, but I did.
You didn't think that was too aggressive?
Brooke, I thought it was aggressive.
Wait a second. Was that really John Dean telling you how happy he is that Roger Stone will die in jail? So CNN's moral arbiter on questions of law and order is literally a convicted felon? It's enough to make your head spin. But at least it's now clear what's actually going on. This is a pure political hit. Roger Stone is facing prison because he is a high-profile Donald Trump supporter. It's that simple. You want proof? Here it is. John Brennan and James Clapper will sleep at home tonight. Both have been caught lying under oath on camera about matters of national importance. And yet neither's in jail. Neither's been indicted. Neither ever will be. The Stone case, by contrast, was transparently political from day one. The lead prosecutor, Andrew Weissman, is now literally an MSNBC contributor. The judge in the case, Amy Berman Jackson, is an out-of-control Democratic partisan who purely out of spite stripped Roger Stone of his First Amendment rights and prevented him from making a living. Coming on this show, for example, speaking at all in public. Now, Stone and his wife, who is 71 years old and deaf, have lost their home because of this. They have no insurance. They're utterly broke. The whole thing is shocking, and it's disgusting. It's a farce that discredits the entire American justice system. The president seems to understand that. Cannot allow this miscarriage of justice, he tweeted recently. He's right on a couple of levels. What's happening to Roger Stone is totally wrong. It's immoral, and we should not allow it in this country. But politically, it has significance, too. Stone's prosecution was designed in part to confirm the fantasies that Democrats have constructed to explain the outcome of the 2016 election. His conviction helps their case. In other words, if the Russia collusion story was a hoax, and of course it most certainly was a hoax, then why is Roger Stone going to prison for his role in it? If Roger Stone serves even a single day behind bars, the Russia lie will be validated as true. Stone's imprisonment will be prima facie evidence in the view of Democrats. So at this point, there's really only one solution. The president must pardon Roger Stone or commute his sentence before he goes to jail. Democrats will howl if he does that. Well, they're howling anyway. They howl every day. Chuck Schumer is now yelping about yet another investigation into Roger Stone. Russiagate 2.